and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to start off by thanking my co-conspirator here in San Francisco, Supervisor Matt Haney, who together with Courtney McDonald and my Chief of Staff, Amy Beinart, helped to put this together. And then also a very special thanks to incredible organization, Local Progress, that many of us are members of, for helping to bring us all together here today. During these incredibly unprecedented times, I believe this press conference is an unprecedented event. We have representatives, local elected officials from 8 cities that are geographically dispersed throughout the United States, from Los Angeles to New Orleans to New York City to San Francisco to St. Paul to Seattle to Philadelphia to Minneapolis. We are coming together with one unified call to our governors, to our president, to our Congress, that we need an immediate moratorium on mortgages and to cancel rent for all individuals and in the case of San Francisco, I'll say at least all businesses for cities that are under a stay-at-home or shelter-in-place order. And I want to make really clear what we mean by mortgage moratorium and rent cancellation, because there's lots of different terms that have been used. What we mean is that while a city is under a stay-at-home or a shelter-in-place order, that banks stop collecting mortgages for property owners, that they pause any interest accumulating on these loans and any late fees. When it comes to rent, we are calling for individuals and businesses to stay in their homes and their places of business without accumulating debt during the period that we have ordered them to stay home and protect themselves, their families, and the public safety. This is what we are calling for. As we collectively throughout the United States are fighting to stop this pandemic, to flatten the curve, we also need to be doing everything in our power to stop the next Great Depression. We need to prepare to get this economy back up and running as soon as we get this pandemic under control. And if we do not cancel rent and place a moratorium on mortgages, we're going to make that almost impossible. We're going to have a mass evictions, whether that's now, starting April 1st, rent day, or whether that's in the future. For those cities that have eviction moratoriums, that is what we're facing. And it is simply not fair, and it is not responsible to order people to stay home to protect the public safety, order them not to work, and then not have relief for their basic needs like paying rent and mortgages. As we know, 78% of Americans already live paycheck to paycheck. They simply do not have the savings to ride out this crisis and continue to pay rent if they're not working. And so we are coming together to call on our national leaders to do what's right and to protect our economy, to protect our public health, and to immediately enact these calls for a mortgage moratorium and a rent cancellation. And with that, we are going to start by hearing from Los Angeles council members, David Ryu and Mike Bonin.
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. This is Councilman Mike Bonin, and you'll hear from my colleague David Ryu in a second. We're sort of tag teaming on these issues here in Los Angeles. I want to thank our sisters and brothers in conspiracy from up north in San Francisco for putting this together. My take on this is that we are in the very early stages right now of what is going to be unprecedented social and economic trauma, and this crisis has drawn into stark relief the profound income inequality and economic vulnerability and housing instability in Los Angeles and across the country. And this crisis is making all of those problems worse. I have never heard from so many people scared, anxious, in distress about their families and their future. And that has magnified today as rent and mortgages are due. Things are rough and they are scary for millions of people. And we haven't seen anything close to the worst of it. Here in LA, David and I, we feel that public officials need to rise to this moment, and we need to act fast and act boldly and act aggressively. And at the local level here in LA, we're pursuing rent freezes and protections against evictions, but it ain't nearly enough. Here we are pushing, and we're getting close, not close enough yet, but we're getting close to a full eviction moratorium, which would prohibit the serving of eviction notices and unlawful detainers. But even that won't be enough because people living paycheck to paycheck are going to be left with tremendous debt, and they're just going to face eviction when this crisis eases. So we need a full and complete moratorium on mortgages and a full and complete cancellation of rents, residential and commercial. And we need it at the state, or even better, at the federal level. David, I'll toss it over to you.
Thank you, Mike. And I first want to thank Supervisor Haney and Ronan for organizing this today. And I just want to say that I stand with my colleague, Councilmember Mike Bonin. And I also want to state the fact that we do understand this domino effect. Because when a business closes due to an order, stay-at-home order or for any other reason, that results in a loss of jobs where people are laid off. And when Americans are laid off, it results in an inability for them to pay their rents, which in turn results in the apartment landlord's inability to pay their mortgage. So we understand the ripple effect. And this is why I'm advocating for a complete freeze, whether it's a moratorium, suspension, forgiveness, however you call it, for rents, mortgages, water bills, property taxes, insurance payments, whatever it is. I am in full support and advocating for a temporary hold on all things during this pandemic. Because, you know, working families and small businesses, as my colleague Mike Bonin and many of you have pointed out, need help now. They need relief right now. They need support right now. And they need to know that everyday Americans need to know that their government has their back, and not just the backs of corporate America, and the fact that everybody on Main Street needs help now, so that Angelenos and Americans can focus on what matters, and that's their health and their families. And I'll turn it over back to you guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And next we'll hear from Minneapolis Councilmember Jeremiah Ellison. You there, Councilmember Ellison?
Yeah, I'm here. I really can't say it a lot better than my colleagues from around the country here. You know, in Minneapolis, we were able to take some action on people's utilities. The governor here has put a moratorium on evictions, but as was stated earlier, at some point that's going to let up. And if in the meantime people haven't been paying their rents and because they can't, because they're out of work, because they're being mandated to stay home, then yeah, we're just sort of prolonging people's housing instability. We're prolonging putting people out onto the street, quite frankly. And so I think that we've got to be advocating. The only responsible thing to do is to advocate for housing stability. And right now that means a suspension or freeze on rents. But again, as was mentioned with this cascading effect, that also means a suspension or freeze on mortgage payments as well. In this crisis right now that we're facing, we need to be focused on ways that we can keep our community stronger, in ways that we can make sure that folks are staying fed, that folks have access to the healthcare that they need, and people being out on the street, people facing housing instability, being displaced from their neighborhoods, being homeless, that's not going to make our community stronger. So I'm 100% for and advocating and will be advocating to the governor here and various levels of government here in Minnesota to suspend rents and mortgages for folks so that we can ease this pressure. With that, you know, I'm gonna hand it over to the rest of my colleagues, and I just want to thank you all for standing in solidarity with each other and with cities from all around the country. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Ellison. Next, we will hear from New Orleans Councilmember Ghislaine Palmer.
Ghislaine Palmer, thank you so much. Thank you for having us, and thank you for asking us to be included. Councilmember Banks and myself are very interested and very much in support of this concept. New Orleans is very different from a lot of you cities. We're experiencing this at an unprecedented level, especially considering not just our vast numbers, but also because of our reliance on the tourism industry. So we have a very large economy that is based on the gig economy, as well as with hospitality jobs that are traditionally very low paying in this town. In addition to that, our median average income in the city of New Orleans is $38,423. With that being said, we have 63% of our renters are cost burdened currently. In addition to that, over 37% of our entire city pays about, looks at 50% of our income goes towards housing costs. So we're in a very precarious time when we look at housing in New Orleans and how that relates to it. And yes, I am, and I think I did bring up the fact of our 25% of the population living below the poverty line. But when we look at that, and we look at that in relationship to our housing, we also have to pay attention to not just to the cessation of potentially of rents and mortgages, but I think it also goes deeper to that, because we also have to look at the different housing markets across the city. In New Orleans, we also have small landlords. We have a lot of still vacant, blighted property throughout the city. And I would encourage y'all to look at other options in addition to this, especially when we talk about rental assistance. Rental assistance could be huge, and to really ensure that we have housing stability in some different marketplaces where this could potentially occur. As with home buyer counseling, and also to get a lot of the people that have these properties long-term improvements. And that's something that we're really also not discussing, because this is just this very moment in time, and it's not going to just continue for the next 60 days. It could go on for a very long time. And I think any request also has to look at the basic inequities of housing that we're seeing in some of our urban cities, and how that we really need to pay attention to what the long-term solutions are this, not just within this moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councilmember. Next, we're going to hear from New York City Councilmember Brad Lander.
Hillary and Matt, thank you so much for organizing this. We're really grateful. I'm New York City Councilmember Brad Lander, and New York City right now is the epicenter of this crisis. And sometimes we like being the epicenter of things, but not this. We've got 1,000 of our neighbors that we've already lost to the crisis. But the economic ramifications are already starting to be felt very powerfully. I was out actually at a food pantry yesterday where 8 in 10 of the people were on the bread line, on the food pantry line for the first time in their lives. And we're seeing the impact the crisis is having on families already. New York is a renter's town. 2/3 of New Yorkers are renters. That's 5.4 million people. And of course, like other high-cost cities around the country, so many of them, especially working-class families, low-income families, immigrant families, people of color, have already been struggling to pay their rent. So losing jobs and income, as so many people have, there's a Times article this morning that you may have seen that estimates that as many as 40% of people are going to be unable to pay this month's rent. So we are facing a crisis like all of you are. The governor did put an 90-day eviction moratorium in place, and he has said, oh, that's fine. But it's not fine if the rent continues to be due and owing, and all it means is that in a couple of months, the set of people that are now on that food pantry line are going to be facing eviction as this health crisis continues to go on. So we are supporting state legislation that's been introduced by New York State Senator Mike Gianaris, and I'm putting the link in the chat. That would be a 90-day suspension of rent during this crisis, and of mortgages as well, for those who have lost income. It is not like everyone stops paying their rent and everyone stops paying their mortgage. Like with unemployment insurance and other programs, you demonstrate that you have seen a loss of income, and that is what brings you this relief. And that's true if you've lost a job, if you've lost a small business, and obviously if you're a landlord whose income isn't coming in because your tenants are unable to pay their rent, it would cover you as well. So Senator Gianaris' legislation is our part of this, national campaign, and we want to see it really grow and spread all around the country. I want to just make one more note here. I think it relates to something that Hillary said up at the top, but in addition to being one other way New York is proud to be a leader, like many of you, is just how many of our residents are immigrants, but folks who are undocumented, and many immigrants with status are not eligible for unemployment insurance. They are not going to get the one-time payment that other Americans can get. So that the idea that that federal relief will put money in your pocket so you could pay the rent, it just doesn't work for literally millions of New Yorkers. And unless we provide some rent relief, we're going to see a mass crisis that ripples on and on and on. And I'll just end by noting, and thanks to Hillary for mentioning local progress at the top. We've got a couple of board members on the call today. I'm proud to be the board chair. We've got a great resource page up that's a database of all the amazing policies cities around the country are putting in place to try to deal with this crisis, putting kind of our most vulnerable residents, putting equity at the center, and that absolutely includes this policy, this work. So thank you guys very much for leading on it.
Thank you, Brad, so much. And next we will hear from Philadelphia Councilmember Helen Gim.
Hi, everybody. I'm Helen Gim, Philadelphia City Council, council member at large, and thank you to Hillary, Michael, David, Matt, and colleagues for coordinating all of this and putting at the forefront what is one of the most important issues we really do need to be talking about as a country in terms of what it means to be part of the public health and to have a sense of economic security, and that is housing. For a long time, many of us have been talking about housing as a human right. And if there's ever been a time to emphasize how essential that is to our actual economic security and our long-term health, not only during this horrible crisis that we're going through right now, but especially afterwards, that moment is right now. Now, today, April 1st, has been a day that millions of people all across the country have dreaded for a long time, because today is the day that rent is due. And for millions of people who have tried to follow the stay-at-home orders, who have made the public health and their own family's health their top priority, they should not have to fear losing the roof over their heads or going bankrupt as a result. So Philadelphia is really proud to join our sister cities. I see my wonderful colleague, Councilmember Jamie Gauthier, on the line with us as well today. We're proud to join our sister cities to call upon our state and federal authorities to suspend, freeze,
Shut up.
however,
Shut
cancel
the hell up.
rent and mortgage payments for those who cannot afford to pay. Pennsylvania has been one of the hardest hit cities in the country. Last month we filed over 500,000 unemployment claims last month. Thank you, Brad, my wonderful partner, for bringing up the issue around immigrants. It's not only that immigrant folks may not be able to qualify, it's that many legal immigrants, including legal permanent residents, green card holders, DACA recipients, might have to choose between being able to take a basic subsidy, a necessary income because they've lost all of theirs, or becoming a citizen of the United States under one of the most cruel rulings to ever come out of that federal
No dip, Ryan Harris.
public charge. So I would also say that I'm really proud to be part of a city that, like many of the others on this call, helped lead an eviction and foreclosure moratorium that's been largely successful. That moratorium must extend beyond the state of emergency. We'll be working on repayment and diversion plans which provide financial relief and protections for renters and property owners once this emergency is lifted. But right now, I mean, we have a path, and I just want to also add, Philadelphia led the nation in creating a very successful mortgage diversion program following the recession of, about a decade or so ago. And it brought together homeowners, lenders, housing counselors to find solutions that would keep people in their homes. And I know that we can do it again. We'll do it for our renters, but we need time. And we need an opportunity to do something that we cannot actually execute at the local level, which is to ask our state and federal authorities to provide immediate relief in order for us to go on that path. So thank you, everybody, for doing this. Thank you for all the people and our advocates, especially, who have made housing as a human right a central call here in our own communities. But now that call must, if not louder than ever, has to resonate through the halls of Congress and throughout our nation. It's the only way we are going to ensure a true economic recovery and the true health for all of our citizenry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Gim, and I'm sorry that you were interrupted. The person was removed from the call who made that remark. Next, we'll hear from San Francisco Supervisor Matt Haney, who worked together with me to organize this event. Supervisor Haney.
Thank you, Supervisor Ronan, for your incredible leadership. And I just want to acknowledge all of the leaders on this call for everything that you're doing during this time. I think that, as we've heard directly from our president and from the federal government, so much of the response is being put on the shoulders of our state governments and local governments. And for that reason, it is critical that we are stepping up, and it's also crucial that we're working together. I've been in elected office for a number of years, and I think this is unprecedented for us to all be coming together in a united way with a single demand based on the urgency of ensuring that everybody can stay in their homes and not undertake massive debt. This is, as Councilmember Ginn said, this is rent day. This is the first of the month when all of us have been hearing from our constituents day in and day out over the past few weeks in fear of what they would do on this day. They have been told to stay home. They're following that order. They've been told that their businesses have to close. They followed that order. They've done everything that we asked them to do to protect public health. And here they are in a place where they're fearful that they won't be able to pay their rent, their bills, and if not, they will go into massive debt, which we know that so many of our residents are already living on the edge, are living in a marginal way where they are already struggling to afford their rent. And now to put this on them, to have them face the impossible choice of going into debt, of potentially facing evictions, or of going outside and risking their own health to make money, is an impossible choice that we should not put them in. So this is an opportunity for us to unite across the country, but it's also a situation where the interests and the needs of small property owners, of landlords, of homeowners, of tenants are actually similar, or actually they can actually be on the same team to demand a mortgage freeze so that they don't incur any penalties and have to pay during this time, and also that we have both a rent freeze and cancellation. This is something that our residents, whether in San Francisco, where many people are paying over 40% of their income before this in rent, or any of the countries around the country, or any of the cities around the country, the urgency for our residents and our constituents and for people from San Francisco all across America could not be greater. So we hope that our respective governors heed this call and do the right thing. The alternative is unimaginable. If we do not provide rent freeze and rent cancellations to residents of this country, there will be a level of debt and homelessness and evictions and foreclosures that we have never seen before. And so this is a way that we can ensure that people can do the right thing now and that they can be supported to get back up on their feet when this is over. So my solidarity with all of you and my gratitude for your leadership. We have to continue to work together and have each other's back.
Thank you, Supervisor Haney. Next, we'll hear from Seattle Councilmember Tammy Morales.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Seattle City Council Member Tammy Morales. Since Seattle declared a civil emergency on March 3rd, my office has been flooded with emails and calls. Our neighbors are calling for rent assistance, for mortgage assistance. I've talked with small business owners who say, you know, I get it, my small business, or property owners who say my small business tenants are shut. So I understand that they are not bringing in revenue, but I still have a mortgage to pay. So what am I supposed to do? So this is a really important thing that we are doing, and I want to thank everybody who's on this call for being part of this movement. This past Monday, Seattle passed the first resolution in the country calling for a residential and commercial rent and mortgage moratorium. The City Council unanimously voted to call on our governor, Jay Inslee, to use his emergency power to protect our neighbors by imposing a rent moratorium across the state. And we also called on Congress and the president to impose a moratorium on mortgages. So we know that during this public health crisis, when people have been ordered to stay home, that those who have lost their jobs are now also at risk of losing their homes, and small businesses are at risk of shutting if they can't pay rent. We also know that those with mortgage payments are in the same situation. So I think it's important that this group of local elected officials from across the country are here standing together in solidarity to acknowledge that we have to keep our neighbors, our constituents, safe from what many have already acknowledged will be the ravages of an economic crisis that's coming and that really puts people's lives at risk. In Washington state, applications for unemployment insurance are up 843%. Rent accounts for over 50% of monthly expenses for many Seattleites. And we all know that across the country, most people could not spend $400 in an emergency. Folks just don't have that kind of money saved up. Here in Seattle, we have, folks who have been deemed essential workers. We have a stay-at-home order here. Bus drivers and grocery workers, though, are still working. So we know that they deserve relief, but so do, your sister who just got laid off, or your mom who's living on a fixed income. The financial industry just got $1.5 trillion windfall from Congress, while individual Americans will get a one-time payment of $1,200. So I think it's important that these resolutions and this group of elected officials are all here to say no to disaster capitalism and to this sort of business as usual where big industry gets the bailouts and individuals are left sort of holding the bag. Here in Seattle, we're already seeing attempts at disaster capitalism. Elders in Central and South Seattle are being harassed to sell their homes to get pushed out of what has traditionally been the Black community in Seattle. So we have to be really strategic about how we do what we can to weather this storm, but as several folks have said already, really thinking strategically about what we do after this, how we rebuild our communities. And it's going to be important that we do it in a way that ensures resilience for our neighbors, but that also provides worker protections and small business sustainability. Here in Seattle, in my district in Southeast Seattle, I'm really committed to making sure that our Black and brown neighbors stay rooted in their community and that they're able to do so without fear of displacement. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about. I chair the Community Economic Development Committee for City Council, and we're starting to think about, once we get through this, what will it look like? How do we make sure that we are providing housing, providing services for our homeless folks, increasing the kind of services that we can provide with permanent supportive housing. This public health crisis quickly became an economic crisis, and we know that we're headed for a recession or worse. So we have to be prepared to not go back to systems as they used to be, but to make our systems better so that they protect our neighbors better. I think it is incumbent upon us as elected officials to make sure that we respond to this kind of shock in a way that protects working families more than it protects the titans of industry as usually happens. So the resolutions we're calling for are really about making sure that everyone has a chance to recover, to weather this crisis and to recover from it, and to really lay the groundwork for better financial security for our neighbors. I do want to also thank Hillary and Matt and Local Progress for helping organize this and for allowing our office to support this effort. We're really hoping that this sparks a campaign for relief for our constituents at every level of government. So I will hand it back to you guys.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Morales. And last but certainly not least, from St. Paul, we have council member, maybe one day Congress member, but council member Mitra Jalali.
Oh, hi, everybody. I hope you can see me okay. I am Councilmember Mitra Jalali. I'm really happy to be joining you from St. Paul. I want to thank Local Progress for pulling this together, and I want to thank the grassroots and community activists who have gotten us to this point, who have really been the ones experiencing what is happening and are pushing for a nationwide rent and mortgage suspension. I've been on our city council for about 1.5 years now. In 2018, I was elected in a special election and became our only renter voice on the current council in a city where over half of us are renting. We now have 2 renters on our council, and consistently, folks who rent are underrepresented in every level of government. I don't know how many renters are in Congress and how that factored into the bill that we got, but the people that are living these things are often not at the table. And I myself still have immense privilege and ability to be able to do the job that I do, and I do not believe I represent the full diversity of our renter community, but I will be a voice in this time where things are extremely real for too many people in our community. In the city of St. Paul, 51% of us rent. We're the majority of our community. We're more likely to be people of color, to be younger, to be folks of all different orientations and backgrounds. We have elderly folks that rent that live in our community too, that are vulnerable to COVID and vulnerable economically because they depend on retirement and other assistance that they may or may not be getting. Of the households in St. Paul who rent, nearly half of those are cost burdened. It's the biggest cost in people's monthly expenses. And so many American families, and this is reflected in our city, the capital city of Minnesota, are one car accident, one medical expense, one kid falling down the stairs, one relative losing their job, one thing of life away from being out on the street. And COVID-19 is like an indefinite series of life accidents that has collided all of the factors of people's lives. I can tell you that both of my parents by now have filed for unemployment. They are going to be okay for the time being, but I expect to potentially have to support some of my immediate relatives, some of my friends whose businesses that they built over 10 years from nothing have closed in 1 month. And so renters in our community are potentially more likely to also take on the cost of supporting other people, don't have the ability to accrue generational wealth that transfers to ownership when the cost of housing in our city continues to be so high. We are often putting that paycheck directly into just keeping the roof over our head versus being able to put it away to eventually transfer to being able to own and not be pushed out of our homes. The stimulus check for the federal government was $1,200 per person, and the median rent in the city of St. Paul, the median rent has tipped past $1,100. So it is both critical relief and resources sometimes feel like you're throwing a twig into like a bonfire. That is what's happening economically to folks right now, and why our suspension on rent and mortgages matters. It matters for folks who are more likely to be shift workers, gig workers, folks losing their jobs, folks experiencing interruption to incomes, people who are freelancers and who we had to fight for in the congressional stimulus bill to even get unemployment benefits. There is a huge gap of a sector of workers in the economy who aren't even like actually recognized as workers qualifying for benefits. And it was only because we stood up and made sure that we were counted that we could even get those additional benefits and forms of relief. So what we need is a giant pause button. We need a giant pause button because everybody in our communities, the majority of our communities and most of the cities on this call are renting, and we are all at the mercy of our bill collectors. And if we are indebted and close to bankruptcy and struggling after the many months that this pandemic is gonna drag on for, it will be so hard to rebuild. And I wanna lift up our neighborhood businesses and places that have storefronts that also owe rent, and why it matters to pause mortgage and to have a rent suspension, because our neighborhood businesses make up who our cities are. They're where people make their income. They're where people feed our kids and families, where we go for all of the things that we miss getting to do because we're social distancing, from fitness class to retail to having food that represents our cultures. And if those places are not standing at the end of all this, then we have lost some of the heart and souls of our very neighborhoods. And so this matters not just for individual residents and for folks who are on the hook for their mortgage and their rent. This matters for the makeup of our cities and communities and who we are. And so I'm glad to join today with the voices of activists, with people in the Twin Cities who've pushed me and other electeds and who are part of the groundswell, like the anti-displacement policy network that we have here spanning Minneapolis and St. Paul, like Twin Cities DSA, we have Inquilinas, we have Homeline, we've Community Stabilization Project. There's so many grassroots groups. And so I know this is a call for elected officials, but I also want to lift up our communities that are the wind at our backs and the fire to our feet. And I will end by just saying that I have renters in the Twin Cities who are reaching out to me, or who are in general considering organizing their buildings to go on strike or go on a rent strike because they're desperate and don't know what else they could possibly do but to stand together. The very absolute least we could do is to stand with the majority of our communities who are tenants and who need our help right now. So thanks for giving me the chance to share my voice as one of many on this press conference.
Thank you so much, and I really do appreciate you bringing up the community groups that are organizing and calling for the very same rent freeze or cancellation and mortgage moratorium that we are. I know Right to the City on a national level is doing that. We have many organizations as well in San Francisco, and many of them are on the call, and we stand united with them in this call. I wanted to thank you all so much for participating. Again, it's just such an honor to work with local elected officials all across the country and unite our call for national action to stop what I say stop the next Great Depression. You know, the first act of the Federal Reserve was to give a $1.5 trillion bailout to the banks. We've seen this movie before. We want to see the relief coming to our residents where it's needed and who are the driving economic forces of our society, and really make cities and communities thrive and function. With that, I'm just going to do a brief sort of summary of this call in Spanish because I've gotten some requests from Telemundo and Univision. Anyone else who wants to do a brief remark in any other language, please feel free to raise their hand or let Courtney know to call on you when I'm done. Muchísimas gracias. Hoy estamos juntándonos a través de todo el país con una llamada unida. Pidiendo a nuestros representantes nacionales, nuestros gobernadores, Congreso, el presidente, que hagan un moratorio sobre las hipotecas y que cancelen la renta, el alquiler para todos los residentes y negocios que están bajo un orden de quedarse en casa. Sabemos que muchas ciudades han podido poner un moratorio en los desalojos, pero sin un moratorio también en los alquileres, en las hipotecas, van a acumular deudas que no van a poder pagar después de cuando termine este crisis del virus. Así que estamos llamando para esto alivio a nuestros inquilinos, nuestros dueños de propiedad, para que cuando termina esta crisis pueden regresar a la economía, regresar a trabajar sin tener que luchar en contra de un desalojo. Así que para la primera vez, ciudades desde Los Ángeles a Minneapolis, Nueva Orleans a New York City, Filadelfia a San Francisco, Seattle a St. Paul, estamos juntándonos con una voz para pedir esta ayuda a nuestras comunidades. No es justo, ni tiene sentido pedir que se queden en casa sin trabajar y no darles alivio para su alquiler, para su renta, para su hipoteca. Muchísimas gracias. Is there anyone else who would like to make their comments in another language before we wrap up? Not seeing anyone. Courtney, just checking in if any of the panelists wanted to say their comments in a language other than English. Seeing none, I wanted to thank everyone so much for participating today. Again, all of the journalists on the call have the press release with all of the panelists' contact information. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. We are available for at least another half an hour to receive your calls and give individual interviews. And again, thank you to Local Progress for helping us organize this call. Have a good day and keep up the fight. Bye.